Hello and welcome everyone to my YouTube channel Philosophy Simplified. So today we are going to start a new series of lecture that is Pre-Socratic philosophers, and these thinkers belong to the ancient Greek philosophy. So Western philosophy begins in ancient Greece in 6th century BCE. And pre-Socratic philosophers were the first philosophers. So before we start exploring pre-Socratic philosophers and their contribution in philosophy, it became quite necessary to ask these simple questions. When there was no philosophy, what was there? As we know that philosophy begins at a particular point of time. Socratics were the first philosophers. But the questions that we are going to discuss today is how philosophy originated. What was the reason behind the originations? So if there was no philosophy, what was there that satisfied the quest of the human intellect? It was Greek mythology. So before the rise of philosophy in ancient Greece, Greek mythology served as the primary framework for understanding the world, natural phenomena and human behaviors. The myths were a collection of stories about God, goddesses, heroes and the creation of the universe. These stories explained everything from the origin of the cosmos to the working of the better human emotions and morality in the form of poems. In mythology, there are two famous poets, that is Homer and Hesiod. Homer's famous poet was Iliad, the story of Troy, and Odysseus, the tale of wandering king. And Hesiod's famous poetry was Theogony. Poetry of these two poets help us to understand the worldview of Greek. In Greek mythology, there are various myths regarding polytheisms, or different explanations, or moral lessons, or human-like gods. All these myths help us to understand worldview of ancient Greece before philosophy came into being. So the prevalent belief in ancient Greece that seen in Greek mythology is polytheisms, where different gods were accepted, and there are different gods for each phenomena, like god of war, god of rain, god of medicine, god of peace, god of animals, god of thundering, of fire, god of water, god of air. God is ascribed to each phenomena. Ancient Greece, which is clearly visible in Greek mythology. So in Greek mythology or in Greek myths, which provided moral guidance and reflected human struggles such as hubris, excessive pride, consequences of disobeying the gods, and the value of bravery, honor and hospitality. Example, the trial of Heracles. And myth explained natural events and human experiences. For example, storms were seen as manifestation of Zeus' anger, while changing seasons were linked to the myth of Persephone or Demeter. So these were local deities that worshipped in ancient Greece. So in nutshell, we can say that the Greek mythology revolves around the faiths and beliefs. Different explanations revolve around faiths and beliefs. So if we now look at the questions that how philosophy originators or by philosophy originators, who were the first philosophers, why they are treated as philosophers. Basically, pre-Socratic philosophers were the first humans who were not satisfied with the Greek mythology or explanations provided by the Greek mythologists. So they start questioning the very explanations that is not grounded in reasonings, which is grounded in faith and belief, which has no rational explanation. So philosophy came into existence by criticizing Greek mythology. The central problems that attracted early philosophers was problem of change and problem of origin. So the fundamental problem that was completely untouched by the ancient Greek mythological explanations was the problem of change. And it is the pre-Socratic philosophers who were profoundly impressed with the fact of change, of birth and growth, decay and death. That means the constant change, the momentary nature of the physical world, the phenomenal world. Change cannot be merely a conflict of opposite. Thoughtful men, that is early philosophers, were convinced that there was something behind these opposites, something that was primary. So the physical world, the phenomenal world that is constantly changing, baffled the mind of early pre-Socratic philosophers and forced them to understand the very changing nature of things. It's early pre-Socratic philosophers who tries first to understand the problem of change and put an efforts to find out the one primitive elements or single stuff out of which everything has originated, as Thales propose it is water. According to Thales, change is phenomenal, but water is nominal. This is a reality out of which everything emerged, everything came into existence. In similar manner, Anaximander proposed that it is something indefinite stuff and named it as Aprion, and Anaximenes call it air as the fundamental stuff. It can be seen that both religion and myth was the cause behind the origin of philosophy, and whatever is explained by these mythology and religious belief remained undigested to early pre-Socratic philosophers, and that become the reason of emergence of philosophy. So it is impossible to deny the importance of Greek mythologists, because they also help us to the early philosophers to shape their views. Or so there are certain similarities that we found in the explanation of both mythical poets and early philosophers, that is pre-Socratic philosophers. Thales, the first pre-Socratic philosophers, hold that water is the fundamental principle of reality. Similarly, in the poems of Homer and Hesiod, it is water out of which everything comes directly or indirectly. But they gave no evidence or kind of scientific explanations as we find in the early pre-Socratic philosophers. So it may have been the case that pre-Socratic philosophers derived their ideas about the various phenomena from mythology, but this was used in a totally different way. This clearly shows that Greek mythology is not utter nonsense, rather it is also an important aspect of mankind. But due to constant intellectual developments, that leads pre-Socratic philosophers to question them. This is how Greek philosophy or Western philosophy came into being or came into existence, or this is how pre-Socratic philosophy begins. So in the upcoming lectures, we are going to discuss all the pre-Socratic philosophers one by one. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching.